Hey there, welcome to episode 11 of the FFS Talk audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. We are recording on the very early afternoon of February 8th, 2024. A nice Thursday here in the oasis we call Las Vegas. Today we're going to talk about the hype, spelled A-I. Leave out the, I suppose. AI is everywhere lately, and it is only getting worse. And I do mean worse. This is yet another show. I would love to have a host plus guest scheme. That is in the cards for this year as a few components come together to kind of raise awareness of what we are trying to accomplish with the various programs I am producing. But we'll get to that in another episode. In the meantime, the links, which will ideally be available in the description area for wherever you located this audio program. I am never very happy with the state of affairs in that regard. That is another longer story in another episode, perhaps. But for the time being, we will be launching ffstalk.com. That's where you'll be able to find original sources of episodes with all of the links and whatnot intact, easily viewed. In the meantime, hopefully you can find these links. First, my two self-indulgent plugs, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, DANHUGO, and Ko-fi.com, KO-fi.com/DanHugo. I'm sure they pronounce it coffee, but just want to be clear that it's KO, Ko-fi, KO-fi, KO-fi.com. I've just updated my buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile page yesterday a little bit with some actual coffee links. My Quaggling Sand episode, which you will find linked there on my profile page. My Quaggling Sand episode was about making coffee, and I figured I may as well delve into that a little bit. Who among us did not become a semi-professional, maybe expert, maybe amateur, maybe, who knows, barista during the lockdowns and whatnot. So I do keep the buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo page reasonably updated. It's basically a link page, link tree. Yeah, sure. But this is more casual. It's just a big page. I will link to my audio programs, which I have presently on Spotify's platform and distributed to other places, but that will change to make it secondary. That goes for this program as well. You are under no obligation to actually buy me anything. However, you are more than welcome to. Proceeds to go towards coffee. So that was the reason for putting some of my favorite coffee beans on there. So on with the show. AI is not artificial intelligence. This was an interesting video. I will leave it at my version of the title. So it's on YouTube. Interesting sort of yet another clarification for the casual consumer of AI services and hype. You know, it's large language models are essentially what people equate with AI now, for better or worse. That's sort of what we're going to get into a little bit here today. The whole entire topic is worthy of much more than an audio program such as this. It's an ongoing discussion. It would be like trying to cover ethics today in 20 to 40 minutes, right? Not going to happen. But you can certainly start thinking about it. Same with AI. Like, what is AI, right? It's not artificial intelligence. That was the point of the video. I found it interesting. Check it out. Many years ago, Apple launched a thing called Sherlock. And I remember it was a search engine tool built into the Finder. If you're a Mac OS person, you know what that is. I used to work at Apple. I don't have any Apple products. You can take that for what it's worth. Apple Sherlock would, among other things, summarize documents. So it could take a long document and turn it into a paragraph. That was one of the reasons I was like, that's interesting. Reader's Digest for your documents folder. So I found it interesting that it was actually based on a product called Watson from a company called Carelia. Well, either way, I have links to Wikipedia pages as a starting point for both of these. I did find it interesting that if you ever hear the term Sherlocking, Apple Sherlocking, if you hear that term, it is when Apple takes your small company project or product, more likely a product that's already shipping, integrates it into their OS, and basically puts you out of business. Apple Sherlocking. So a little bit of extra history there. I didn't even know that term, since I'm not an Apple fan by any stretch, but a little bonus. I have another. Actually, all of these are Wikipedia links today. Good for them. I have a link about the Colossus, the Forbin project. It was a book. It was a movie. I've seen the movie. Interesting. Sort of a doomsday computer takes over the world. Actually, two computers take over the world. It's the thing everybody's sort of afraid of, except when they're having AI write their emails for them. Then they're like, oh, no, it's fine. I have a link to the Mechanical Turk. This is the actual Mechanical Turk of history, not the Amazon product or service, I suppose. The Mechanical Turk was a robot, I guess you could say, that would, I think it was play chess. I should refresh on that particular thing. It was a robot that would pretend to do magical things like playing chess, but it was actually run by people. So the people were pulling the levers and so on. So it wasn't really intelligent. It was merely leverage. It was a facade. I'm not saying that AI is exactly that, but it is a question of what you believe you are seeing versus what is actually happening. So, apropos. And a link to the Turing test. Everybody knows what the Turing test is. Or do you? There's a lot of subtleties to the Turing test, and as it has become more of a possibility that AI would be able to maybe put on a convincing show for a casual observer. What does that really mean? You can guess from some headlines and some stories that are written probably by AI that AI made predictions. AI said this. It described that. It had predicted the end of the world. All these things. Those are not really true, which is something we'll touch on today. So, yeah, who is the human on the Turing test pairing when people think about this? But really, in general, the Turing test probably exposes some more subtleties than it tries to consolidate into a test. On with the show again. We have seen too many movies, which is one of the problems. So from the Forbin Project to War Games, if you saw that, fine movie. I've seen it many times. The Terminator, which always gets attention. The first movie was groundbreaking in many ways. AI, the movie, the Steven Spielberg movie with Haley Joel Osment as a little robot kid. Tear-jerking, and there have been many more. There have been tons of robot movies. You got your various characters in TV shows. We're assigning too much of our imagined credibility to what exists today. So we've been told and shown, convinced, and sort of drawn in to the notion of a robot assistant or a computer adversary or so on and so on. So remember, Star Trek had Data and many other automata. Star Wars has droids all over the place. Knight Rider had Kit. There's so many tech-leaning television programs of the 90s especially, but even recently. And there is always a component in any of the future or tech-leaning shows. I'm totally spacing on the name of it, but Small Wonder, I think it was the little girl was a robot. So that wasn't really even a tech show. It was a little weird, in fact. But there's always an opportunity to inject some future-looking, eye-catching, attention-grabbing nerdism into television dramas and comedies. So that's where we are starting to become familiar. And we don't really differentiate different types of robots, automation, coded automation. Who among us doesn't have a smart speaker, at least one, or a intelligent assistant on your mobile device from any of the big companies? Certainly, we have grown comfortable with what we believe is some sort of AI-like thing. As more AI is becoming commonplace in the headlines, we're starting to see that that thing that any of the big companies, any of the FANG companies has been saying is some sort of intelligent assistant or smart speaker. They're not that smart. And the same is true of ChatGPT, but not quite as obvious. Very old stories, the Mechanical Turk I mentioned. Surely there have been other tales of mysticism. Maybe it was shown in the form of supernatural forces or something. But there's always this question about some unknown oversight, power, being doing things that are not completely understood, and so much is attributed to them. The important thing among many is that patterns are not creativity. Actual intelligence of any kind tends to want things, some sort of desire, motivation, etc. If your AI has no ambition, I would question the I part. An actual intelligence should want to and be able to improvise. This not hallucinating, that is probably something else, although it's arguable that creativity and hallucinating in AI, creativity in humans, might have similar starting points. But if your AI cannot improvise, it's not really intelligent. And that's important to know, especially with large language models. So improvisational and ambitious interactions should be something like your computer or your technology, your robot, your being should start a conversation. It should have some ambition enough to commence an interaction or engagement, and it should come up with something to tell you, not what you've told it to tell you, not what you've told it to do. True intelligence, even artificial, would be, and you'll hear the term artificial general intelligence or AGI, should be able to interact with you, possibly passing a modern take on the Turing test so that you wouldn't know exactly who you're talking to. You're talking to another thing, another intelligence, another being. Oh, it happens to be algorithmic rather than biological, perhaps. We have been told too many times of this Turing test, though, and that's important to know. Just because it seems like it might be a human doesn't mean it actually is intelligent. You have to wonder about the human side of the Turing test. Is that person or being all that smart? Large language models are not scientists. This is something I've been particularly troubled with. You'll see scientists design new antenna with AI. That's a headline I saw quite some time ago. But you'll see similar, like I remember one was an IBM project where they designed food menus, came up with a bunch of new recipes. They all tasted great. Okay. Can a large language model do math? Well, now they may code in specific handling of mathematics, but the way a large language model works is it takes language, trains a model on how language works, then it can be trained on some facts or some opinions or some styles, so that if you say, what is 1 plus 1, the model may have been trained on such things as, 1 plus 1 is 2. So it can tell you that specifically. But if your model is never trained on any sort of mathematical notions or terminology, and you say, what's 1 plus 1, it may not have any idea, or it may come up with its own interpretation of those words based on the vectors in its database. So these are not actual computing devices in that sense at that time. They are merely pattern matching and turning out responses that match statistically your question or your prompt. You may, in fact, if you're looking for answers to analytical questions, you're probably looking for predictive analytical AI, which exists and possibly is where some of these scientific revelations come from. Even a menu of food. If you analyze ingredients, the predictive analytics of what ingredients would go well based on what ingredients do well is different than what words describing the ingredients would generate a description of new menu items, right? New recipes. So it's important, it's absolutely critical, in fact, to know your sources. This will become ever more critical and important and well, I think critical is a good word. Moving forward, if you didn't know how a system was working and how it came up with answers, you may think that radar or that antenna, I think it was radar, but it could have been anything. You may think that antenna was designed by the same AI that you're using to write your emails for you. If your AI plans a meal, it may again be a description of recipes, not some sort of analysis of recipes. So if you said, I am gluten-free or I am allergic to peanuts, design me a menu or design recipes of foods that mimic other similar foods but without these ingredients that I'm allergic to. That's probably a good experiment to do. Maybe I'll do that later. I don't really use ChatGPT or anything like that, but I should. I mean, I've used it, but I don't use it day to day because it's not where I would like it to be before I start relying on it for anything. So it's novel and neato, and I like to write. I don't need to automate my creativity. But anyway, you should know how it's arriving at those recipes. If you're relying on your AI to provide you with new menu and recipe ideas for a special needs diet, a diet with attention paid to potential allergens or other reactions, you would want to know how it's arriving at these things. One of my favorites is if you are allergic to anise for some reason, and you didn't know that anise stars, if they were called something else, if you didn't know that this ingredient had anise in it because of the name of the ingredient, you might not know that you're allergic to it. That's a bad example, but you can take any food that is not called what it is. A large language model may have no idea what the ingredients are of a component of a recipe, and so it may not have any idea that it is a potential problem that you're trying to solve with its assistance. So if you don't know how the AI is performing its task for you, you may or may not want to trust the outcomes. If your doctor tells you your x-rays were analyzed with AI, because you may have seen headlines that AI is better able to detect different features of an x-ray to diagnose potential disease, potential issues. So you may see that, AI can solve that and must be the right answer. But you have to ask, what kind of AI was used to detect this thing that you're finding with my x-ray, if you found anything? If it didn't find anything and you used AI, tell me more. Large language models are not ideal for that. That's where you'd want to have an analytical model trained on x-ray data, not on descriptions of x-ray data. If you can define a collection of features, literally features in x-rays of people with and without different types of disease, and you isolate the training to those, you don't pick up extra bonuses like the lighting in the room. Hopefully you're not using a camera with ambient light. But if you have a carefully trained predictive analytical model on the science of what it's looking at in the x-rays, or at least pattern matching with features identified. So a trained, what do you call it? Trained, what am I totally spacing on the word? When it's being watched over, what is it called? Supervised, thank you. A trained, supervised model on specific data, and possibly with other components of the data. You may be considering patient age, other circumstances, other symptoms, et cetera, et cetera. So an analytical model takes the math and science part, tries to deduce patterns if it's doing pattern matching, and will predict based on this analytical model But if you're using a large language model, it may read an article about x-rays and then say, oh, you have a cloud in your brain, a fog. You have a brain cloud, not brain fog. Joe versus the volcano. Thank you. So you have to be careful of where you're getting these responses. I just read an article the other day, which I have not linked to. Doctors are now using AI tools, large language models, almost certainly, to summarize their medical notes if they're recording an audio description or maybe they're writing, any combination of. So you have to be careful about what sort of large language model you are using for these. If you're the doctor side, and I'm not giving medical advice, but if you are the patient, I would want to know if you're given a one paragraph summary of a particular set of treatments or interactions with your doctor or other medical professionals, right? If you're getting a summary of that, you'd want to know how that summary was created. If it was created by a person with whom you've interacted versus some AI that may have been trained on Monty Python scripts, you may get different summaries that may include or leave out different things. And if you already are aware that some AI models are prone to lying or being funny, you'd want to know that. If you're receiving investment advice, is it based on actual market data and maybe indicators that are represented directly in, say, a stock price or a trading volume on a particular day? You can measure those against other stocks and other indicators, or are they taking into account global economic factors, political, geopolitical factors, et cetera, et cetera? So there's a ton of data. So is the investment advice you're receiving from some AI based on actual market data or on pictures of market data, which is possible? And you should know that the pictures of market data may provide exactly the information that really well trains your model on which you are basing your investment decisions. That is absolutely possible. You should know that. Don't be surprised later. So what do we do about this? There is only going to be more AI. You're going to hear that word. You may lose your job. You'll be replaced by AI. I predict, I'm totally guessing, I mean, I could be completely wrong. I hope I'm not. I predict every job that gets lost to AI. We're laying off 12,000 people. We're replacing them with 2 computers and an Apple Newton. Sometime shortly after, something will happen in any particular case. Google may find that, I don't know how this would be possible, but their customer service experiences got worse because they handed everything over to Bard or Gemini or whatever they're going to call that. It could be that companies that are generating forecasts or other, white collar, as they say, thought worker type output. Maybe companies are relying on AI generated code for their products. Maybe they're jumping into this with both feet. Although articles I've read suggest the contrary at larger businesses. But in general, if you have lost your job, or you're losing your job, or you might lose your job and eventually lose your job to AI, quote, AI, unquote, I predict that within 1 to 2 years, there will be the aha moment. Oh, this is not working as well. It will be the full self-driving feature that's been promised for well over a decade. I'm not exactly sure how long. I'm not a Tesla fan. But full self-driving, I think it's on version 12. Is that what I've read in the headlines? Is full self-driving taking place in the workplace such that jobs are being lost to AI before it really knows how to drive? Something to think about. Generally, though, you should always learn to recognize different types and applications of AI. This means you need to stay abreast of how things work. This is going to be an impossible task for some, although you could always ask AI to summarize the current state of the art and hope that it doesn't lie to you. You should understand where your information is coming from, always. Whether you should consider it, whether you should trust it, and whether you should make real decisions based upon it. I liken this to a degree hanging on the wall when you visit a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, anyone in a learned profession. You would want to know, did you Did you go to med school, or are you self-taught? You don't need college. That's what my doctor always tells me. So you should decide. Now you have to assign some sort of credibility to what you are hearing or information you're receiving from a given source. You should have a basis on which to base that trust. Basis and base. I don't know if I put those too close together. But when you are told something, if your doctor tells you something and says, well, we did a predictive analysis on the x-ray based on 12 million other x-rays with patient data correlated. We've come up with these 3 possibilities, and the scores are the diagnoses from this predictive model are ranked by likelihood. So you've got 3 choices above, ranked, 80%, 10%, whatever. There's an 80% chance it's a smudge on the film or whatever. So if you have that discussion with a doctor who knows what they're doing, you may trust that information more than I ran it through ChatGPT and it said you should have a nice day. Right? You have to really know what's going on and what kind of information you're receiving. And I'm concerned myself that people will come to trust, just as the old I read it on the internet adage. I was told this by AI. How could it be wrong? Would Data lie to me? From Star Trek. Would Kit lie to me about self-driving? So we may be too easily convinced to anthropomorphize our AI overlords and believe what we are told because the sentence structure seems right. You should always ask questions. Ideally of the humans who understand their particular AI-based product or service. So if you can talk to someone who's actually developing, building, training, working with ChatGPT, Llama, Bard/Gemini, any of these products and services, if you can somehow get reliable information about how they work, what they are able to do, what their limitations are, you may end up talking to a large language model anyway. That's something we'll all have to get used to. Still, though, ask questions and consider the responses carefully, especially if you're making life-changing decisions, whether it's about finance or health or even operating a motor vehicle on the roads. So there you go. I think this will be an ongoing topic, so I'm not going to dive in too much today. Frankly speaking, there is too much to dive into on any one day, and I am by no means an AI expert. So I am a software architect. I'm a software engineer. I'm a computer engineer. I'm a nerd. I've been reading about this stuff for years. I've seen all the movies and the TV shows. I have smart speakers. I am completely and totally not impressed by I'm impressed by the accomplishments thus far, but I'm not impressed with the rampant adoption and excitement over what is essentially pattern matching. And I would love to see more predictive analytical AI, machine learning, getting a lot more attention. These are much more practical. These are much more, I'm not going to say reliable, but the outputs would have more of a basis in science, actual data. If you're training a large language model on the internet, I think this has already been shown time and time again, you end up plucking the worst of human interaction from documents, and your large language model will almost too quickly, but I think eventually, without safeguards, guardrails, as they say, without specifically limiting what the model can and cannot do, you are opening yourself up to who knows what. At least with an analytical model, you would be able to go back and analyze what has come out. Those antenna, for example, that were designed by a predictive analytical model about how radio antennae work, you could try them and you could show, 90% of the designs that were suggested in this model do perform better. That's pretty good. I don't know. I just made that number up. You could try those recipes from the IBM AI project about recipe design, and you could feed that back in. The supervised model, you would say you came up with these 100 recipes. These 12 were bad. Or, we wanted a gluten-free menu and two of the items that you came up with had gluten, so let's iterate on these outputs and correct the model. The reward function maybe needs some adjustment, or maybe more indicators, more features need to be part of the model. So for my part, I mentioned I'm a software person. There's been quite a bit of hype about how programming is going away. You don't need to be a programmer anymore. You just tell your large language model, your Copilot, there's several, I don't even know all of them. As someone said, I think they were talking to Linus Torvalds, the Linux kernel guy. The person asking him the question said, I view a large language model code tools as auto replace, auto insert on steroids, if you will. So if you start typing some characters, it will start filling in, or it will say, oh, you have these variables, you're trying to do this, so it'll fill in some code that it has seen somewhere else. And a controversial use of open source code, whether private code was used and so on in GitHub. But the bottom line is you are basically seeing, autofill. So it's filling in code that you would have written based on code it has seen that's probably similar. And Linus says, well, that is not false, but it is important to know that sometimes you can use AI tools to write these pieces of code that aren't error prone as much because they've already been written. So they possibly have been tested. I think a really interesting use of AI would be creation of test code. Everybody hates test code, right? Like, I don't want to waste my time on test code. I want to implement the product, not test yesterday's version, or whatever the arguments are. But man, it is nice to be able to know your code works, especially if you didn't write it. So computer automation of test code would be interesting. If you were sitting in your Tesla and someone said, okay, the code for the brakes has been generated by AI, would you drive that car? Would you wonder, are these brakes going to work 100% of the time? Is there a corner case it didn't consider? Your AI is not going to be sitting behind the wheel of a Tesla testing those brakes in real life. You or someone you know or care about will. So it would be nice to know that the person or people that coded up the braking system or the airbag system or the seatbelt tensioner or whatever, any of these safety components, don't even think about full self-driving. But the parts of a car that are trying to keep you safe will ideally have been designed, coded, tested, retested by someone who has a vested interest in the code working, like a person. Like, do you drive a Tesla? Yes. Okay. That's a good start. So the cost, the reward functions and all that for humans are just as much a consideration as for AI in some cases. So I myself do not use Copilot or things like this because here's the bottom line on that at this time in 2024. If you have a large language model or a coding buddy, Copilot, etc., write code for you, and you are a programmer, you understand your code, then it is autofill on steroids. It is taking some of the time that you would spend typing, repetitive, okay, I've seen this, I've already written this code 25 times. You can look at the code it creates for you. Great, that looks right. And it's pulling that code from other examples, probably statistically the most prevalent structure in your language of choice. Okay, that's interesting. If you are not a coder, if you are not a programmer, if you're not a software engineer, and you rely on automated code generation to build me an app, you have no idea what it built for you. You don't know when it works, when it doesn't. You don't know any of the architectural decisions that were made. You don't know what will happen for a given input, if it will completely fail, if it will dump all of your private data to some client who knows the exact equivalent of a prompt to provide. So you won't have any idea how your system is working or what to do when you need to integrate it with other things, when you need to add a feature. Has anyone talked about maintaining code with AI? That's a good question. So I think this is generally true. I saw an article from the former director of Google News. I'm not even going to link to it. these articles are everywhere. You'll find them at all times, just like this audio program. There's always an opinion, a take on the state of AI, and that could change every day. But the comment was that tech will replace journalism. And I would counter and say that tech may replace, or at least minimize, unfortunately, the skill set required to do proper news reporting. Journalism, in my view, and if you can read various articles, I just did an episode on this last week about news versus journalism. Journalism is the equivalent of like software architect, right? You kind of have to understand a system. You come to understand whether it's political, whether it's agricultural. I'm going to, as a journalist, learn how the system works. I'm going to talk to the people involved, the people who designed it, the people who maintain it, whatever that system is. I'm going to understand the system. I'm going to determine what works and what doesn't, and I'm going to describe, I'm going to write an article, I'm going to document with notes and references and links and so on, a gap, a problem, a solution, a thing that works better than it did before, et cetera, et cetera. So I think journalism, if it is replaced by AI, it will be a disastrous replacement. Reporting news, I think, should be a matter of summarizing multiple sources for a particular person, free from bias, ideally, so that multiple sources can be consolidated into one, highlighting the common points, right? Like, 5, 6 different sources came to similar conclusions about these things, but they differed on these other things. I think that might be very valuable. But to blindly accept reporting from a large language model with unknown biases, with unknown training background, possibly written with an agenda that is, we would like to maintain our readership. We are going to summarize articles in such a way as the terminology and bias present in the summary output will be more appealing. We'll retain our advertising-based readership or viewers, I should say, watchers, viewers, listeners, and readers. What can we do to feed their need? So AI will probably lean that way heavily, but I'm concerned and not looking forward to actual science, the art of coding, computer programming, the essential journalism, so essential to society, a true accounting of what's happening, if that even exists anymore. There are some critical areas. AI, I think, should be used for writing test code, hey, why not use AI to create all of the test vectors for a new CPU design so you don't have to read about Spectre and Meltdown and the list goes on and on about these horrible, usually about predictive branching lately, software. They're software bugs, but you just paid $10,000 for a new CPU from AMD or Intel, and whoopsie. I think it'd be worth. And because I worked at Intel, I've heard stories from people doing the chip implementations with IP libraries that have never been tested sufficiently, et cetera. So these are areas where AI could excel because it could actually do some predictive analytics on potential attack vectors. It could not rely on textual descriptions of things, but on actual circuitry and so on. Same goes for any science or any sort of complicated system, but let's understand what sort of things we're working with and how they are working when we talk of, and possibly worse, rely on artificial intelligence. I say this in February of 2024. Let us see what the coming months and years bring. My fingers are crossed. So on that note, I will leave it here. I hope this is one of the many topics that I will eventually have some guests to discuss. Website launching, so a better place to find the primary publication of our media. YouTube channel maybe, or at least some sort of video. I would love to have some live streaming so we can have more interaction. But got to build an audience first and develop a pattern of host-guest discussion. So guests, did I say host earlier? I want to have guests on to talk about this. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much. buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. You are not obligated to buy. You're not obligated to spend any money, but I do have links to all of my audio programs, projects. The page will be maintained in general. And if you do want to buy me a coffee, I do have a list of coffees that I like. You don't have to buy me that coffee that way. Proceeds go towards purchase of coffee beans or equipment, and all projects are powered by coffee. And that is where I will leave it today. Thank you for listening. Take care.